Another huge story of the day, the fallout from the GOP presidential candidates debate. One of the most talked about moments coming during an exchange between Carly Fiorina and Donald Trump over his now infamous comments about her face. Listen.
You know, it's interesting to me. Mr. Trump said that he heard Mr. Bush very clearly and what Mr. Bush said. I think women all over this country heard very clearly what Mr. Trump said.
I think she's got a beautiful face, and I think she's a beautiful woman.
Joining me now, Mark Thiessen, former presidential speechwriter, fellow at American Enterprise Institute, and Washington Post columnist. How did that one fly?
That was a great moment for Carly Fiorina. I mean, she really shined in the debate last night. And what was great about that moment, Gretchen, was that it was completely unscripted, because she had no way of knowing that Trump and Bush would have that exchange beforehand, where he was describing, where Trump was insisting on the plain meaning of what Bush said when he was going to cut women's health. And she just came up with that answer on the fly, and it was just devastating for Donald Trump.
You said she killed it last night. She was your obvious winner. Who else did well?
I think Marco Rubio did very well. I think Marco Rubio looked very presidential. His depth on foreign policy, he looked like he could be commander-in-chief. And particularly the two of them, Rubio and Fiorina, in contrast with Donald Trump, who was completely out of his depth on foreign policy, showed a really marked contrast. And I think it was a very good night for Marco Rubio, a very good night for Carly Fiorina, a very bad night for Donald Trump.
Well, speaking of Donald Trump and foreign policy, listen to this snippet when he was pushed on Syria, and then how Rubio responded.
Syria is a mess. You look at what's going on with ISIS in there. Now think of this. We're fighting ISIS. ISIS wants to fight Syria. Why are we fighting ISIS in Syria? Let them fight each other and pick up the remnants.
The only answer I heard to the question I asked is that you would reach out to Vladimir Putin and you would do what?
I believe that I will get along. We will do, between that, Ukraine, all of the other problems, we won't have the kind of problems that our country has right now with Russia and many other nations.
Here's what you're going to see in the next few weeks. The Russians will begin to fly combat missions in that region, not just targeting ISIS, but in order to prop up Assad. He will also then turn to other countries in the region and say, America is no longer a reliable ally, Egypt. America is no longer a reliable ally, Saudi Arabia. Begin to rely on us. What he is doing is he is trying to replace us as the single most important power broker in the Middle East, and this president is allowing it.
What I thought was fascinating was that you have a politician there in Marco Rubio, but actually sounding really, really good. And this has been the year of the non-politician. I guess on the other side, you had Carly Fiorina, who seemed to have just as much knowledge on foreign policy.
No, absolutely. Well, first, what you just saw there was a guy who's ready to be commander-in-chief and a guy whose depth on foreign policy is about 1 inch thick. And then you also had Carly Fiorina, who, as you point out, is an outsider. But people don't know this. She was the chairman of the CIA External Advisory Board. She has a top-secret SCI security clearance. So she knows these guys and she knows these issues very, very well. And she had a great moment in that Syria exchange where, remember, Donald Trump didn't know who General Soleimani of the Quds Force was.
Right.
She said the reason it's important to know who General Soleimani is because he just traveled to Moscow and met with Vladimir Putin, and now we have Russian troops in Syria. So that was just showed a real serious depth for someone who's an outsider. She's a real threat to Trump. She's an outsider like him in a year when people are looking for outsiders, but she's very substantive, very deep.
It'll be very interesting to see how this reflects in the next polling. Mark Thiessen, great to have your expertise. Thank you.
Thanks, Gretchen.
We know what the GOP field said when they took the stage last night, but what did their body language say? What did it tell us about them? And one name was brought up multiple times last night, and we don't mean the candidates trying to get Jake Tapper's attention. Ronald Reagan. So did anybody win one for the Gipper?
I think I actually flew on this plane with Ronald Reagan when I was a congressman.
Well, think if Reagan had said that during the Cold War.
Mr. Trump. I'm on the Reagan side of this.